Debbie here with Garden Style. So welcome to my first series of Grow More in 24. And what I'm going to cover today are all the things we can do in the garden during the month of February. Now here in the Northwest, we kind of have a unique zone up here. We tend to be a little more tepid than other areas in the United States just because of where we're located. Now where I am in Zone 8, I am actually circled by water, probably on three sides of us, as I live on the peninsula here in Washington, the Key Peninsula as they call it. So we have a tendency to be a little milder as far as our winter temperatures go, with today being the exception. We're mild, but we're usually not this mild. Now when I talked to you last time, we were in the teens. It was so cold due to a cold front that had come down across us from Canada. And a good portion of the United States had suffered from that last cold front that dipped down. But now it has drifted away and has now been replaced by what we call the atmospheric river. And that's basically Pineapple Express, whatever you want to call it. But that is fronts that come to us straight out of Hawaii. And so it brings all of this warm air with it. So compared to last week, this week, we're probably about 40 degrees warmer than we were last week. We're due to hit 60 degrees today, which just gets me all excited because that's just perfect weather to be getting out in the garden. However, you got to dodge raindrops. And usually when we're receiving all this warm weather, we're receiving the rain that comes along with it. Now today, it looks like we're in between systems, so I hope to get outside and get started and start on my February to-do list, even though we're not quite out of January yet, but we will be by Wednesday. Okay, so what do we start to do in February in our Northwest gardens? Well, first of all, you can still plant. You can almost plant year-round here in our zone because we don't quite get the hard freezes that other places get in the United States. We might get a little bit of a crust on the top of the soil, maybe a couple of inches of frost or ice when it's really cold out, but that eventually goes away when we get into temperatures like what we have today, and it gets down into the 40s at night. That makes the soil pliable and ready to go as far as planting. So I encourage all you folks to go out and start looking for things like camellias and hellebores, evergreen shrubs, trees, and I'll get into more of that as I get into my to-do list for February. But don't be afraid. Get out there and start picking out your plants and put them in the ground now, because they don't suffer near as much stress as they would if you start putting them in the ground in May and June, as we go right into what we typically call our hot, dry summers. So don't be afraid to plant. Lots is available out there. And after this series video, of course, I'll get into all of that throughout the month of February. All right. Seeds. That's the very first thing I'm going to start my to-do list for February, whether you want to grow seeds indoors or outdoors. Get down to your garden centers now and pick out all the seeds that you're going to need or want throughout the entire year. So if you like to plant early crops, start going out there and looking for your lettuce and your kale and your broccoli and Brussels sprouts. Start looking for all those seeds because it's getting very close to time to put those in the ground now. Any of your summer crops that you want to grow, like your tomatoes, squash, even though you're not going to be planting them till later, I encourage you to pick those seeds out now and just get your supply, because we have suffered from seed shortages over the last couple of years, and I'm not sure how bad that's going to be this year. It improved a little bit last year, but I just tell gardeners, why make 3 or 4 trips to the garden center? Get everything you need now, because we are stocked chock full to the hilt. And I'll be showing you my seed rack here in just a second. But seeds for sure. So go out, shop for those. Everything you're going to need for the entire year. Our last frost date here in Zone 8A or B, they say is March 15th. I've seen it frost after that. So I like to say April 1st for our area, and I've lived here for the last 40 years, so I have a pretty good feel as to when I've seen my last final frost. Either way, Mother Nature always surprises us, and she will lean either way. So when you go to plant your seed, knowing your frost date in your zone is extremely important before you go out and start buying the seeds that you want. And then, of course, you just count backwards as to how many weeks it will take for those seeds to come up. before your last frost date. And that gives you a pretty good idea of what it is you can plant now, what you can plant in a couple of weeks, and so on and so on. So seeds are definitely at the top of the list. Start to prep your veggie beds. Now's the time to do it. Get out there and start cleaning out all the debris, pull out old plants, weeds, any of that, and start to get them amended and prepped. A real good thing to do, and I do this every single year, is to add some compost to your veggie beds. You know, the plants that you had in there last year have used up all the energy that's in that soil, so it's a good idea to replenish that. And what I mean by compost, you can use your own compost that you've created in your own yard. Hallelujah, if you have done that. But now's the time to start composting. You can use composted manure, fish, bagged compost, which is what I use in my gardens. Anything that will help replenish the nutrients back into the soil. Once you have added your compost, then you can start adding your starter fertilizers. And there are several available out there on the market. I personally like the Espoma products, so I use the Biotone. And I sprinkle a lot of that over the tops of the gardens and dig that in. And then your beds are ready for seeds. They're ready for seeds and plants once we get further on into the season. Most of your garden centers won't start to see your veggie starts until middle of March, towards the end of March. All depends on the weather. And of course, what the frost is doing at night, how cold it is at night. But either way, if you're going to plant some early winter crops like your lettuces, kale, root crops like radishes, carrots, all those can go in now. Just be prepared with a little bit of frost cloth in case those temperatures get down below 32. And that's when your seedlings have already come up and are starting to show leaves above the soil. I like direct sowing. I like it a lot better than starting seeds indoors, but that's just my personal preference. I don't have to fiddle around with lights and temperature controls and heat mats and all of that. I just like to put the seeds directly out into the garden. So watching your frost dates, your temperatures, and how many weeks it takes for your seeds to actually sprout and come up above the soil is super important. And I'll be covering a lot more of that as we get further into February. Okay, let's see. Pruning. Pruning is huge in February. This is the time to start pruning your fruit trees, your rose bushes, evergreen shrubs that don't bloom. What else? Oh my goodness, I could go through all the plants. Just be very careful when you go out to prune that you know what you have. It's really important. If you just go willy-nilly and start pruning things, you could be pruning this spring's blooms off. So as a general rule, if you're not sure about what it is you own, especially when it comes to hydrangeas, that's a lot of questions around hydrangeas, lilacs, any of those types of plants, don't prune them until right after they're done flowering. And then you can be sure you're not going to cut off this year's blooms. But yeah, you want to start pruning fruit trees, your rose bushes, evergreens, cut back any dead or diseased branches. That's where I begin, is I just start looking to see if anything has died or gotten broken or is diseased, and I cut those off first. You also want to take care of any branches that are crossing over each other, especially in the middle of the trees, fruit trees. This is really important that you open up the center of the tree so light can get down inside the canopy for the fruits that come up later, as well as shaping your trees. You want to cut off any water sprouts. These are just these teeny weeny little branches, which I'll get into in some of my next videos when I get into pruning a little bit deeper than today. But there's little water sprout branches that sprout up, you know, when you're trimming the edges and everything, and they just start to come up, and they just take more energy from the tree, which means if it's taking energy from the tree, it's also taking energy out of making any fruit. So real important that those things get cut off, etc., etc. So fruit trees are like a science all in themselves. We actually have classes that we have here at the nursery that teach people how to prune their fruit trees, because they seem to be kind of tricky for some people, but once you've done it a couple times and you have the hang of it, it's actually pretty easy. And of course, there's a bazillion videos out there that go into great detail as to how to prune a fruit tree, so I'm going to try not to get into those details today. Rose bushes, that's a big one. Now's the time to get them pruned. Some of my roses, because we've had such warm weather, are already springing their leaves. I keep talking to them. I keep telling them, stop. It's too early yet. Don't put your leaves out. But they're kind of stubborn that way, and they'll send out their leaves. Either way, guarantee you when you walk up to a rose bush, you're going to find at least 1 or 2 dead canes. Make sure to cut those out and trim them down so that you have just a bunch of flowers coming into the spring and the fall on your rose bushes. Evergreen hedges. So if you have a hedge that you use for privacy, that sort of thing, and they don't bloom, go ahead, start trimming them and shaping them and get them in shape so that you don't have that to do later when your to-do list basically triples by the time you get to March. So the more you can get done here in February, getting everything prepped and ready, the more fun you're going to have in March actually planting and starting to shape the garden for the spring. Okay, another thing you can do, especially if you've been pruning fruit trees, is to start treating them for fungus. Here in the Northwest, we are famous for cold, wet winters, and sometimes it doesn't even need to be cold and wet. We still have issues with fungus because we get a lot of rain. So on a dry day, especially with peach trees and fruit trees, this is the perfect time to start doing some preventative maintenance by spraying your trees with like a copper fungicide to guard against fungus. Especially with peach trees, this is the time of the year when they start to unfold their leaves and you notice they're all curled or starting to discolor, or they have little bumps in them. That's a fungus, and they usually call it peach leaf curl. But if you start treating now, before they get their leaves on them, that fungus has a tendency to disappear into the bark of the trees, and that's where it winters over. So if you can get an early start and treat them now, hopefully you can prevent that being an issue when you get into spring and you start seeing the leaves unfurl. Now, if you do get them, it's not the end of the world. It usually doesn't kill the tree. It just might cut down on the amount of fruit that you get or the amount of flowers that you get in the spring. So preventative treatment is always good. But a copper fungicide works really well, combined with like a horticulture oil that will help it adhere to the branches, meaning there are no leaves on the tree. And that's a great preventative. And if you have a real problem with it, you may want to treat them again as you get into April and again in the fall before they start to lose their leaves and go dormant for the winter. So just a little side note there for fungus treatment. Okay, now's the perfect time to start cutting back any of your grasses and perennials that you have left standing throughout the winter. Now's the time to start cutting them back. I don't encourage a whole lot of garden cleanup right now, so if you have lots of leaves and natural debris that's laying in the ground, I try really hard not to disturb those things right at the moment, only because as soon as you disturb some of the stuff that's sitting there on the ground, it may be driving you crazy. I know it does me. It's also preventing weeds from coming up, because now's the time of the year where you start to see them poking their little ugly heads through the soil. So the more you can keep the soil covered, the less chance you're going to have a whole bunch of weeds taking over your garden all at once. So try not to uncover the earth, the bare ground, until you're ready to mulch right after you have done your cleanup. So cutting back grasses and perennials is super important. Fertilizing. You want to be sure to get down your first dose of fertilizer on everything, except for maybe your lawn. I usually wait until March when I start to fertilize my lawn, just because I don't want to be mowing it twice a week right now. And honestly, at this time of the year, it's really hard to find a day that's dry enough to actually be able to mow your lawn and fertilize it. So I'm not too worried about the lawn, but all your plants, your trees, shrubs, everything should get their first dose of fertilizer right now. And I use a lot of organic fertilizers, just depending on what it is you're fertilizing. Again, I'm real big on the Espoma products. There's tree tones, flower tone, plant tone, garden tone, holly tone, you name it. All you got to do is go into your local nurseries and ask about it, and they'll be more than happy to explain to you which ones are appropriate for the types of plants you're trying to fertilize. Just an overall general fertilizer is a great thing to do if you have it. To give everybody a dose of food before they really start to kick in and get active. By then they have taken it up inside of the plant and they have all kinds of energy by the time they start to open up in the spring. And let's face it, with all the rain that we get during the wintertime, it's pretty much washed out whatever nutrients was left in the soil. So now's a good time to go in there and replenish it right now here in February. Okay, so let me get back to cleanup. As I'm pruning a lot of my trees and shrubs, you of course need to rake afterwards, right? So you're going to be raking up a lot of the leaves and debris that are sitting around your trees and shrubs that have been there all winter long, and that's okay. Hopefully you have been mulching in the past. Ever since I moved into my home, I've been mulching or having a brand new batch of mulch brought in once every 2 or 3 years. And that's just enough to cover at least a couple inches of the soil. And so I'm probably going on my third or fourth time, and I just did this last year, so I have no need to bring more mulch in this year. And it's a real fine bark mulch that I use, and I like it because it interlocks together and actually creates kind of like this blanket or the carpet, which helps keep the weeds out. I had a whole lot less weeding to do last year, and hopefully that'll be the case this year because I have a layer sitting over the soil. So if you're going to go out there and start cleaning up and you're exposing that bare earth, be prepared to go right in behind and put a mulch down so that you're not encouraging those weeds, because as soon as you disturb the soil, you're also encouraging the weeds to start coming up. So mulch right after you're done cleaning, and it doesn't have to be a bark mulch. Use whatever's available to you. If you have a lot of leaves in the yard, crush them up, put them back under there, anything to cover the soil. Pine needles, anything to keep the bare earth from showing itself to the daylight, because that'll just encourage weed seeds, and then it's over after that. So cleanup is super important. Something else is edging your beds if it's not too wet out. I would love to start edging my beds right now, but after 2 or 3 atmospheric rivers that have blown through here over the last few months, I think I'm going to wait. I like to see at least a week or 2 without any rain before I get out there and start edging my beds, or else, the soil's just too wet. It's too soft to be worked in. But February, March are the perfect times to get out there and start re-edging your beds and shaping them and getting them ready for spring. So there you go. Quick rundown for Grow More in 24. We're starting to see all kinds of new plants starting to roll in as your nurseries are starting to gear up now. We had almost a truck a day this past week starting to bring in new plants. Next week and the week after, the deliveries just get heavier and heavier as we start to load up the place with new plants and, of course, new inspiration to get out there in the yard. All right, you guys, of course, if you have any questions or comments, you can leave those in the description box down below. Or you can send any questions to gardenstylenw@gmail.com. You can also sign up for a monthly newsletter, and that'll be coming out here in a few days at sunnycrestnursery.com. And just keep loading yourself up with more and more information as we get into spring. So there you go, February to-do list, and we'll go on from there. All right, you guys, get out there. It's warm, it's beautiful when it's not raining. Get your hands dirty, okay? And we'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.